Hey everyone.
Hi.
Welcome to the Starting a New Project Workshop. I know that there are a couple new people here tonight, just so that you're aware. I'm Jackson, I'm president of the Video Game Development Club. This is the Video Game Development Club in case you're very lost. I'm basically going to go over some advice for how to go about starting a new project. This isn't about how to design an entire project. It is about doing effective brainstorming and preparing a project for going into production. Basically, the goal would be you start with a blank canvas and you end with a pitchable idea. So let's get started. There are two main ways that you can go about coming up with a concept that I think are useful and valuable in general. You can either start with a central theme, or you can start with a central mechanic. Here I have a terrible photo from the game Inside, and I have a photo from, obviously, Splatoon. These two games went about designing themselves in radically different ways. I'm going to go over a little bit about the history of Splatoon first, and then I'll talk about Inside. Splatoon started with a mechanic. It was nothing but some black and white cubes that could spray what became paint and move through that paint. That was all that they had. Nintendo is famous for taking mechanics and building out of them. What happened was that when they had this mechanic and said, okay, we need a way to explain stylistically how these characters are moving through the paint, and we need, basically that was it. And what they came up with was squid kids, or inkling. Then the sort of punk aesthetic that is found throughout the game came largely from, I cannot remember his name, a designer who saw the idea of shooting paint at walls as graffiti and decided to build a punk aesthetic out of that idea. Inside went about things differently. Instead, starting with a central theme of control and designing one of its main mechanics, the ability to, with a certain kind of helmet, control other beings, it developed that mechanic out of that theme. And while it could have been done the other way around, everything in the game is centered around that theme of control. And that is the way that I'm going to talk about designing your concept today. Because unless you already have an idea for a mechanic, it's very difficult to just brainstorm one with brute force. So first, I actually want to see if we can identify another game's theme. I don't have any images, so we're gonna see about some stuff. Who here has played Red Dead Redemption 2? Not enough people. How many people have played Bloodborne? Not enough people. Okay, the first Zelda. Even if you haven't played it, have you seen what it looks like? Do you know what you do? Cool. What would you say that the theme of the first Legend of Zelda is?
They should be saying first.
Adventure? Okay. You have
Exploration.
Those are two of the biggest ones, yes. Exploration, adventure, and especially discovery. The idea that you can go and there are things that burn a hole in this hedgerow and there's something there. That idea of discovery was so much of the game. It led to ideas like needing a save, needing the ability to save. The Legend of Zelda was the first game with a save. And that is a mechanic. The choice to let a player save is a legitimate mechanic. And it was used because that need for exploration and discovery of this huge map was important. The ability to burn bushes is a mechanic that came out of the desire for discovery. And so you can take these themes and build around them, and that's an incredibly powerful thing. So let's talk about that. Let's do an exercise. I want you to think of an icon. We're going to look on a whiteboard. Jimmy, what can you see? All right. Look at this. Think about it. All right? Think of some iconic creature, person, something, and raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, go.
Dragons.
Dragons. All right. So we're going to start thinking about dragons. Good. All right. Dragons. What do dragons bring to mind? First thoughts. Go.
Thanks.
Thanks. All right. And just start saying words.
Fire.
Fire.
Fly.
Tails.
Gold.
Flight.
Baby dragons.
Tails.
Medieval
All right.
times.
All right. All right. One more.
Castles.
Tails.
All right. So we have a set of images. And images are powerful. Why? What about these images strikes you, baby dragons? So what about the fangs? Fangs are probably striking because there's an element of danger, right? Same with fire. And so we can think about this. Wow, okay. By then taking these and thinking danger. That's my high school danger.
Damter.
Yes, that's what would have happened. Danger. Okay, now flight. What makes flight powerful, especially within the context of a dragon?
First final movement. Freedom.
Freedom. Okay. What else? Power. Power.
The unknown. Think about it, you never can predict what's going to happen.
I'll write it. I'm not sure how I feel about it. But
Maybe with Eastern dragons, they're not wings.
They still fly.
Yeah, I know, but they're not wings of one knowing how to fly.
But I think that we're getting at something with freedom and power here. I think the idea there is that they have this strength to them that we don't necessarily have, that they are beyond what is human. Gold. Wealth. I think also power. Would you agree that power definitely
Jane.
fame? Absolutely.
Avarice.
Avarice, definitely. Okay. Baby dragons.
They're adorable.
Cute.
Okay. That's legitimate.
Give them marketing.
I guess just sort of like dogs that are
Right.
in application.
They're adorable. Pets. Castle training. All right.
Just be right a little bigger.
I cannot. Castles.
Sturdy.
Environment.
Definitely sturdy, fortified.
It's
Home. I'm gonna say home/lair.
They're old.
Old. Old.
Age.
So they're old. I would say stone is kind of cold. It has this skeletal feeling almost.
Imposing?
Imposing, yes. All right. So we have these ideas about why these images are striking, why those things make us connect with these icons. So what ultimate truth can we find in dragons that makes us want to make a game out of them? Would we say it is their power, wealth, and their avarice, the danger they present? The beliefs of them?
To be very scientific, they're awesome.
They are, indeed, awesome. You see there, what we find, we've got a lot of things that are very human. And I think you'll find a lot that what's human resonates, and what resonates makes for good games, and good media in general. And so, we use the answers to the question why these things strike us to come up with our themes. And you will know when you've found your theme for a game, when you can answer what is your game about without saying what the player is doing. So let's start getting into how to brainstorm some ideas. But first, two things. When you start actually going about brainstorming, try not to have a specific kind of game in mind. Don't have this art style in mind. Don't go in with a story you want to make into a game. Don't even have a medium. You don't know that you're making a video game yet. You certainly don't know that you're making a VR game yet. You don't know that you're making a first-person shooter or anything. Pen and paper is as legitimate a medium for a game as anything else. And also, resist the urge to name your project. Outside of starting mechanics and your essential theme, naming your project can only just shrink what your game can become. You're only limiting yourself by giving it a name, because you're influencing every decision you make for it after that. So, everything should be done in service to the theme. Because, like I said before, when you have a theme that resonates, you have something that speaks to people. And the more you can feed into that thing that resonates, the stronger your game will be. And so, the thing to do now is kind of like what we did here, except more for games. I'm not going to write that much, because no one will be able to read it. But the first thing to do is just start writing a bunch of garbage related to your theme. Just write everything that comes to mind. Just purely associate as freely as you can. Good ideas, bad ideas. Write it in pen. Do not erase anything. Don't scratch it out until you are done. Do this for 10 minutes, and don't you dare ignore yourself. The idea here is that you're getting everything you can on a piece of paper, and then once the creativity in you has been roughly exhausted, and you are no longer judging yourself, then you can start thinking about how these weird things can work together to make something interesting. And what's interesting is what's going to make something new when everything's been done before. So, what my next slide is. Okay, so that's the next thing. The only thing I want to reiterate again, don't throw out weird or what you immediately assume are bad ideas right away. Don't do it. And also, you're not looking for a perfect idea, because there are none. If you're looking for a perfect idea, you're going to be sitting at your desk wondering why you're not one of the greatest for the rest of your life. Because no one starts with an idea fully formed. No one. Ever. And so what you're looking to find is something that you can do differently. Something that's interesting. And so once you've started to do those brainstorming exercises, you want to start putting together your idea. And to do that, you really want to start thinking about 4 main things: technology, mechanics, aesthetics, and story. I'm gonna get to story in a little bit. But technology, in most cases, will refer to the medium that you choose for your game. Mechanics refers more precisely to how the player is going to interface with the character. Technology can be thought of as a way for a player to interface with a game. The mechanics are the way the player interfaces with a character. And then the aesthetics are obviously how the game looks, feels, sounds. If you have a really unique game, smells.
Tastes. Tastes.
Very unique game. So technology. There are a lot of games. There have been games for millennia. Some have been made with pen and paper, some have been made with mouse, keyboard, gamepad, head-mounted display, dice, miniatures, folded cardboard. Folding cardboard. The Nintendo Labo is a legitimate thing.
Is it though?
It's cool. It is a legitimate thing, yes. It's actually kind of cool. And the thing is, the reason that the Lego exists, think of it however you want, they decided that they weren't going to assume their technology. We came out of the same mindset. You don't know what you can make until you know what you have at your disposal. And so for technology, you may want to start there and think about what kinds of mechanics this allows you to have. Or you may want to take some of your other ideas and think about what technology best informs that idea. Think about CO2 canisters and capsules of paint. Do you think anyone started with that and said, what should we do with this? No, they thought, I want to shoot people with paint. Here's what I need to do that. So you can go about this in a number of different ways. So that you guys know, I hope no one lost, I hope I didn't lose anyone there. I'm talking about paintball. I'm talking about paintball. Side note, here's the first of 2 mini rants. It's really dumb to choose medium first. It's a really bad idea, and here's why. What would checkers look like if it had been made for a computer? I don't mean what does online checkers look like. I mean that if checkers hadn't been made as a board game, what would it look like for a computer? It's pretty much impossible to think about. And the reason for that, in large part, is because the medium was the right choice. It wasn't going to be anything other than what it was. Making checkers a computer game only works when you're using the computer to represent what medium it was already using, because the medium was perfect for this game. If you had decided that you wanted to make a game, but it has to be a computer game, you're never going to get checkers, ever. And so what you need to think about is what experience you want to provide, and then consider what allows you to do that best. Because if you start with hardware, and then you start, and from there you branch to experiences, you're getting one branch of a tree, and you're limiting yourself massively unnecessarily. You wouldn't want to play tennis with a baseball bat, so don't assume it's the tool you'll need until you know it's the best tool for the job. Okay, so let's think about flight as a mechanic. It's super exciting. I think everyone can pretty much say at some point they've wanted to be able to fly. That resonates with everyone. That's powerful. So let's think about it. Why don't we see more games with flight? Does anyone have any ideas?
It can be hard to implement.
It can be hard to implement, sure.
It's tricky to sort of achieve a balance of like having enough realism to the flight without it being like a flight simulator and having it be like fun enough to implement into the game.
Could be a difficulty there. I think it's more likely that the very thing that you want from flight, that freedom and autonomy, is very, very difficult to achieve without also removing any difficulty of actually achieving a goal as a player. There's a difficulty in putting something out of reach, which is ultimately what games have to involve at some point, is an incentive. An incentive usually involves you going from point A to B in some capacity. But when you can fly, the only way you can keep someone from getting from point A to B is to put something indoors or underground. And in both cases, flight no longer matters. So you either have no reason to have a power, or you have no difficulty having that power, and that's not engaging. So flight is very difficult to nail down as a mechanic, even though it resonates, because at this moment, it's almost impossible to not have it be paradoxical in implementation. So you have to think about mechanics in service of a theme, while also considering how a player is actually going to experience that mechanic. Just because it resonates doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be, just because the idea resonates doesn't mean that the implementation will resonate. Aesthetic. Oh man, I had a picture for this. Hold on.
Did it involve vaporware?
No, hold on. I don't know what that is. But
Aesthetic.
hold on. We'll get there. It's worth it. Just gonna put that there for a second. Everyone close your eyes.
That's enough.
You can open your eyes now.
Aesthetic.
Oh, yes.
You see, aesthetics matter. And they matter in more ways than one.
I mean, if the eyes were smaller, it'd be kind of okay.
But that's a different aesthetic. Any change you make is a change to aesthetic. Mario, as it plays, on the same technology, the same mechanics, with the same story, would be incredibly different if you looked like this the entire time.
They're missing out.
I play it well.
I'm not going to address that.
I think the game might be marketed towards a different audience.
Maybe.
I think I've made my point. Second mini rant, let's go. Story. What do I mean when I say story? Do I mean plot? Do I mean hero's journey? Any ideas? Character arcs?
So mechanics was the way that like the player you interact with the player, and then technology is the way that you interact with the game. I would say that like the summary story is the way that like the game interacts with you.
You're very, very close. I would say it's the way that the character interacts with the game. I think it's probably just a pedantic way of saying things differently. Semantically, it might be the same. Basically, I mean what the character is actually doing. I don't mean narrative necessarily, unless you take narrative to mean a particular thing. If there is a plot, and there doesn't have to be, what is the plot of Checkers? don't. It's not a very plot-heavy game, but there is a story. The story of checkers unfolds in how the game is played. Same is true of chess and every other game. The story is the friends you made along the way. See, everyone's happy about that. It's because it's true. Not every game, not even every video game needs to have a 3-act structure. And if you go in with a story, it's likely that you don't need to make it into a game. If you have a novel, it's already working as a novel. If you have a screenplay, then it's meant to be a screenplay. If it's working in its own medium, then it's working in its own medium. You don't need what a game has. And it's not going to bring to it something that it didn't have unless you're changing what your focus is. And at that point, you have a different thing. What you can do, if you have a story and you want to adapt it to a game, then you take a really long, hard look at it and think about why it works. Why does this story resonate with me? And from there, like we did before, we can start thinking about what the theme is, why that thing really touches us. But do not, under any circumstances, think that story is more important than technology, mechanics, or aesthetics. It's no more important and it's no less important. It is just one of the four. More brainstorming considerations. Consider these things. I'm not going to make you read. So, you have to think about who you actually want playing your game. Sometimes that's you, but if you are me, it probably shouldn't be you. Because I'm special. I like weird stuff. Joseph knows.
Oh, I know.
So you do need to think about who your ideal player is. I hate to talk about demographics, but demographics are a thing. Because for no other reason than to think about the experience they had playing games. Someone who is in their 70s likely didn't grow up playing games and was unlikely to start when they started getting popular. And so they're not going to have the same assumptions and what are called biases that we might have because we've been playing games forever. Someone who, my sister is less than 10 years old, and she can work an iPad better than I can. That is because, one, she knows her way around a tablet, and I don't have one. She grew up using one every day since she could. There are these understandings developed because of these expectations. iPad hadn't been invented when I was her age. And so there's going to be a disconnect in our experience. The same is true of other kinds of demographics as well. The VR it's not going to be accessible to lower socioeconomic families. And so you have to consider what kinds of games you're putting on that store and whether they're going to resonate with the audience that is going to be playing them. So it's really unfortunate, but that's the way it is. So you do have to consider what is valuable to your players, what motivates them, because life experience motivates people in different ways. So from there, you can start thinking about what problems your player will want to solve. Just implicitly, what do they already want to do? So what problem can you give them that they will immediately want to attack and solve? So that when they do solve it, it feels good, or at least feels how you want it to feel. Because God knows games don't need to be fun. The goal should be to be engaging. I'm not going to talk about that anymore because I will speak for hours. And so you have to think about how your player is experiencing the game then. How are the mechanics reflecting that theme? How are the aesthetics reflecting that theme? And then scope. Scope. everyone, actually not everyone in here has heard me talk about scope. I'm sure everyone in here has heard about scope in some capacity, but if you haven't, you're about to. In general, I do think that there is a bit of miscommunication when you talk about scope. I think a lot of us have heard scope down, keep your scope small, keep your scope small, so that you can make something attainable. You want your idea to be something that you can actually go and see come to fruition. However, there isn't a whole lot of detail given about what part of scope or what scope actually means in a practical sense. There's just this idea of how big your game is. But that's useless. And so let's think about it. Scope actually has to refer in part to a really, really relative measure of size. And size is split into discipline, and disciplines are split into sub-disciplines. And then from there, you have to split even further into actual tasks. So let's think about things in a slightly more manageable way. Let's think about scope in terms of teams. Scope is all about what your team is capable of. And what your team is capable of is highly dependent on its composition in a disciplinary sense, in an experience sense. How well do the people on your team know what they're doing? What have they done before? How likely are they to run into roadblocks that they've never seen before? If you have a team with 1 artist and 6 programmers, you're going to be able to make a very particular kind of game. If you have a team with 6 artists and 1 programmer, you're going to be able to make a very different kind of game. But if you had the other team make the other project, all of a sudden scope changes dramatically. The scope on the same game for a team of the same size has gotten much larger. You can't trade projects and expect scope to stay the same, because scope is not static. It is relative, it's not objective. So let's think about how to scope down thoughtfully in a way that's actually going to consider what the cause of a problem is and how to actually solve it. First, let's think about what you probably want to think about what the largest single obstacle you're encountering or are going to encounter is. And this is assuming that you've gotten to a point where you've decided, oh, I've gotten a little out of control. And so you need to start thinking about what the source of that obstacle is. Does it have to do with your team? Does it have to do with the time allotted to you? Is it based on the knowledge you have or don't have? Is it all of them? Probably, because it always is. And so from there, once you've determined what the source is, really start thinking about what progress specifically that obstacle is preventing you from making. And once you've determined that, start thinking about if there's a better way that you could make that progress that would work better for the team. So you can circumvent that obstacle without sacrificing the specific thing that you want to have in your game. If you just can't think of a better way to do it, then let's dig a little deeper and start thinking about what ultimate goal you were trying to achieve with that particular kind of progress. If the progress you're talking about is a mechanic, you want to be able to develop this mechanic so that your player can do this thing, then the goal you were trying to achieve with that progress was to provide the player with this particular experience. Is there a way to achieve that goal of allowing your player to have that ability? The mechanic can be much more specific than the ability that it gives you. the ability to wall jump is oftentimes similar to the ability to grapple. It's just a little bit different in its execution. One's going to leave you in one place where the other is likely to have you slide, but even that is not necessarily the same. But say you're having some trouble with the physics of figuring out a jump and trying to get jumps to work in a way that makes sense. Maybe a grapple allows you to just zip your character to that position. Maybe that's easier for some reason, whatever you're using. In that case, you can achieve a similar goal through a different means. And if you can't do that, if there's just no better way to achieve the goal, really think about how essential that goal is. Really contemplate. Because at this point, you're getting to the point where you're going to start cutting some content and or changing some content radically. And think about the ultimate purpose that you were trying to fulfill. The ability to wall jump or to grapple would ultimately be to allow a player an exciting form of navigation, to be able to circumvent these vertical obstacles that we wouldn't be able to. It's a kind of power fantasy. How else might you be able to achieve that goal, that purpose, rather? That might work a little bit better, that might be easier for your team. And I put for the team at the end of each of these, because all of these scoping issues will come down to what your team is capable of. And your decision needs to be made with your team in mind, because when you do scope down, if you scope down incorrectly and without regard for your team, it's very likely that you've increased the scope for someone else. So you have to be careful. A tailored tip for you guys. Doesn't work as well this semester because we are halfway through the semester, give or take. But if you're thinking about making a game over the course of the semester, especially if you're thinking about working on it during club time specifically, to think about what your scope should be, consider what you can do starting now, if you work 8 hours a day for 7 days. If you had all the time in the world to work if you could work a full-time job type schedule on a game, what can you do in a week? What do you reasonably think you can make? That includes learning, the things that you don't know how to do, which, yay, that's an exciting thing that is difficult and it takes time. And then, because you don't know everything, you'll be debugging, and that takes time. How much do you think you can get done that week? Okay, now you've got that idea in your head. That's what you should do in a semester with your team. Working with a team, that's how much you should be, that's how much gain you should expect to make over the course of the semester. Because, if you do the math a little bit, 7 days, 8 hours a day, 56 hours. It's a lot of time. Okay. How many weeks are there in a semester? 14. I'm going to answer that question for you. If you work during club, we have 2-hour meetings for 14 weeks. We don't meet every week, by the way, much as I would love to. You have 28 hours of work. That allows you twice as much time as you technically would need, man-hours-wise, to actually screw up the way that you will screw up. And for those miscommunications that you will have with the team that you didn't take into consideration when you were working solo. And that's important because the larger your team gets, the more difficult it becomes to actually talk about a project that suits a team of that size. And it can be a bummer to look at that and think, really? A week's work should take a semester? Yes, it should. And if you finish early, congratulations, you finished early and you can do the next thing. You can build off of it, you can build onto it if you want. But your scope should start in a place that's realistic. And what's realistic is that. Further advice, iterate quickly. If you can't get a mechanic prototyped in a month of these meetings, then you need to scope down. Because if you can't get your basic interaction, your player's basic thing to do, your minimum viable product in a month, then at the end of 4 months, you're not going to have a game. You're not going to have what you originally were hoping to do. And that's just the way that things go.